Hello, everyone. Welcome to the series Mud Talks, Creative Coding, Generative Art, Interactive Installations, and Live Coding with Katarina Hoeger, Class of 13, and Jessica Stringham, Class of 13. My name is Vanessa Chu, Associate Director in the Office of Alumni and Parent Relations. We thank you for attending today's event. This talk is being recorded and will be distributed after the event. Please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box, and we will try to get through as many questions as possible. Now, I'm going to turn over to our speakers. Katarina and Jessica, thanks for being here today. The floor is all yours.
Excellent. Okay. So, all right. Welcome to Creative Coding, this talk on creative coding. So I'm Katarina, and I'll let Jessica take the first slide.
Sweet. Hi. I can hear myself. I'm Jessica Stringham. I use they, them pronouns. I graduated from Mudd, much like Katarina, in 2013 with a degree in computer science. Right now I'm a staff machine learning engineer at Spotify. And then my alter ego, I guess, is my artist name is this or that. And I do a lot of different things. Right now I'm doing a lot of live coding and generative art things. And yeah, back to Katarina.
Right. So I'm Katarina. I use pronouns she, her. I'm also class of 13, but I was a math major. And I'm a full-time artist, but a part-time Mathematica engineer at a small alums firm, actually. And I have the live coding name of Cougars Are Cats too, but I'm an intermedia artist, so I dabble in a lot of different media, including live coding. But Jessica and I reconnected through live coding, so we'll talk a little bit about live coding in general later, and you'll get to see it. So what are some things that we learned at Mudd that made it easier for us to do creative coding? Well, for me, some of those include the fact that I probably actually wouldn't have learned to code. Well, I might have learned to code, but I originally set off to college thinking I was going to be an aerospace engineer. So I would have probably learned a little bit of coding, but not have dabbled nearly as much as I ended up dabbling in because of the core curriculum. And then, of course, there's always there are all sorts of algorithms that you use all the time. In particular, for some of the work I do now, there's motion tracking, and that uses a lot of like matrix operations. And then other work deals a lot with probability. But some things aside from just like algorithms, math heavy, computer science heavy things, it's actually one of the things I learned was to be persistent through the core curriculum, because I had to look at things many different ways, figure out how to solve problems from multiple angles. And I also, back when I thought I was going to be an engineer, I had to learn how to make an engineering notebook. That's actually been really useful to me, just keeping track of notes the same way the engineers do. And then basically learning how to choose my coding languages and tools for my project. That was something that I felt like I learned a lot because of the fact that in different classes we use different software. That's been helpful to me in creative coding. So Jessica, what are some things that you learned from Mudd and you use in creative coding? Jessica?
Sorry, having a little internet instability. So let's see how this goes. Yeah. So kind of like similar to things Katarina said, I did go to Mudd thinking I was going to learn like computer science. So I've just been like coding ever since. But like there's certain like great things where when I'm like reading through papers or something to implement some new algorithm and they start to draw on different things, like I had to do like Newton Coates stuff recently or something. I'm like, oh, like I'm not afraid of it because I at least like touched a little bit of it back at Mudd. And it's really been like kind of fun to like, I feel like I'm kind of going back through all of the things I learned at Mudd, but at a much like a slower pace, and then also getting to like produce like weird images as a result. And like also this one was kind of fun on the left is back in like 2011, I remember sitting in like East Lounge and coding up this like music recommendation graph, and it used like it was a force directed layout to kind of make all the nodes show up at the right place. And then I like turned around and re-implemented it however many years later and made the thing in the background, like kind of using like similar physics and stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, I've done that before while I was hanging out at Mudd. So that's been pretty cool. Yeah, and now I think we're kind of going through and talking a little bit about what kinds of things we do with that. So on the left, this is a picture of me live coding from last Friday, a week ago, I guess. And I'm like performing, I'm on my computer, there's a MIDI controller next to me. And like, let's see. So if you can tell, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm actually modifying a YAML file, if you're familiar with YAML files. Either people aren't, or they're like, haha, that's funny, that's for infrastructure configuration and stuff like that. And you better not type in NO or something. Anyways, but it works great for what I'm doing. I've built like my own little engine in Rust, and then it's generating the image on the left of the left image. And then I kind of like tweak it live. We'll talk a little bit more about live coding, but it is like kind of like, that's my like instrument interface is a YAML file. And then on the right, I use the Fourier decomposition to draw this cool picture of a seagull, and I have performed live with this cool picture of the seagull. Yeah, and then besides that, I also do like trying to do material things. So this is a pen plotted pattern that I created. What is a pen plotter, you might wonder? It's this cool little robot guy that looks like this. It holds a pen for you, and you send it up, you write code to create your design, and you send it to it, and it'll like draw it out. Kind of like a 3D printer, but it's a 2D printer, and you can put different pens in it. You can do like gel pens, or people put paintbrushes in it, and you can like really start to explore like weird things by writing code. Yeah, and then so how did I get here between Mudd and where I am today? So after a few years, after Mudd, I started to go into machine learning. I went to did a master's and got machine learning. And part of my motivation to go there is also like for like data visualization, just being able to do more and more powerful like weird data crunching things. And while I was doing that, I made this one on the right, like while I was a machine learning, well, I am a machine learning engineer, but like while I was in school there, and it's, I'm using Chernoff faces for visualizing book topic embeddings. So book topics that my little model determined were similar to each other will have similar faces, and ones that are farther away will have different faces. And I felt like projects like this were like really fun, and I wanted to find ways like, how can I like start to do them more? And I realized I could just start to do them more. And that was great. And then I wanted to find other people making things. And I had like just moved to New York, and I was like, oh, I know there's like a scene here. I want to like figure out what's going on. And then immediately there was a pandemic. So I ended up sitting quietly in my room for a year or two. And then I started to come back out and like build things. And the first thing I did, there's something in New York called ITP Camp, and we'll talk a little bit about like ways to find communities and stuff like that. But it's like a short little summer camp you can do where you have access to like a makerspace and a lot of other people making, finding the intersection between art and technology. And it's great, it's lots of fun. And that was kind of like the first thing where I started to like actually meet a lot of people doing it. And then I started to find more and more groups, especially around New York City. Like the live coding community and such. Yeah, and then like one of the things like you're supposed to kind of like say what your artist statement, like what you're trying to kind of do. And at the moment, I kind of like revolve around these like 3 different things. One is finding alternate interfaces. So I'm kind of sick of keyboards and screens. I want to find something else. The first thing I found was like a MIDI controller. So that's the thing with all the dials that I'm twisting, that's then changing what the design looks like, that I can then pen plot. So just like figuring out like ways to plug things in or output in different ways. I also, like, if you can't tell, I'm kind of goofy, and I like to like, I call it bug harvesting. So I build things from scratch that you should never build from scratch, like a graphics engine, and things obviously break. And then I see what breaks and what looks cool, and then I try to do things like that on purpose. And I feel like it's really cool of kind of exploring like weird corners that I wouldn't be able to explore otherwise. And like sometimes you can create really beautiful things, and it's neat to push on technology in this like kind of different way. And then the third one, since I'm a machine learning engineer, I know a lot about data and stuff. And like one of the things I'm kind of trying to poke at, I don't poke at very often, but it is like small data. So trying to use ML techniques on like smaller amounts of data to kind of like, instead of just building larger and larger models, which is also cool, but trying to build smaller and smaller models that do different things and seeing what that can do. Yeah. And with that, I'll hand it back to Katarina.
Yeah, so we've got some overlapping ideas and a little bit of different implementations and techniques. So one of the things I do, I sometimes dabble in generative visuals. I dabble in a lot of media, and that'll become clearer as I talk. And so with that, this is something I made with something called the processing sketchbook. Processing is a really common way for people to make visuals. And this is basically based off of a picture I took, and uses some probability rules and choices and the characteristics of how pixel data is stored, and honestly area, and just kind of made a picture with it. And the thing about this is something that has to be displayed on a screen the way I made it. But what I found specifically during the pandemic is that this is something I ran into specifically during the pandemic. It was nice to not always have to display things on a screen, because if I make it and tweak everything so that it works well on my screen, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll work on screens of a different dimension. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be displayed well if someone doesn't have nearly as nice a screen as I do, or if they have different, maybe they don't have a computer. There are all sorts of things. Like, this is something I would never have been able to share with my grandmother. I actually did try, and like I had to, she was never able to see it very large because I was never able to get a screen to her. So the sort of thing that I wanted to also try doing variations of physically, see what you can do. So this was just to take something that's on the computer, print it, see what happens when you make it something small that's portable, people can wear it. So I've been experimenting a little bit with this. I've been experimenting honestly with visuals, taking visuals and taking work that's been generated on the computer, and just different ways I can get it out to people. How can people interact with it? How can it live in some place other than on my computer screen? And so one of the things I was experimenting with it's a concept called event scores. And so it's the idea of giving humans directions, and this was really popular in like the 60s and 70s, honestly. Like, as a group of artists that Yoko Ono hung out with, like, did this sort of thing all the time. And this is a set of like postcard event scores. So you send someone a postcard, and like you can do one side of the postcard, they can do the other side of the postcard. This was also a pandemic project, because I was kind of locked up I was in grad school in Maine at the time, so I was locked up in my house in Maine by myself, and I was like really disconnected and wanted to connect with people. But something interesting about this is, like, you're like, what does this have to do with coding? Well, I made every single postcard. There are 20 postcards in a set, and I made every single postcard slightly different because I can code. And then there are 20 postcards in a collection of postcards in one run of the postal scores. So that would have been annoying to do by hand. I took advantage of the fact that I can use LaTeX, actually, and generated all of them. So that's not necessarily something people use for coding, creative coding most of the time, but you can use it. It's a coding language, right? And then right now, my favorite thing to do is make interactive installations, which we're going to get into detail about how that works. But the software I use for that is Max MSP. And that's because it is something that handles sound well and can take visual input. This particular project takes the visuals from a camera that's up at the top that you can't see, and as someone moves through space, it picks up the differences, it tracks the differences in motion, but frame by frame, and it uses that as the system uses that as triggers for the sounds, and so the person moves, the system responds, and it's interactive. So the last thing I'm going to mention is that I too live code, and oftentimes I'm live coding as a live code as a audio person. Most of the time I'm making music sounds, but in this particular performance I was doing visuals and audio, so you can do both. And actually this is using Max MSP, so not all coding languages have to be typed. This one's like interface a drag and drop interface programming language. So how did I get here from Mudd? So before Mudd, I was already into the arts. I was playing my flute, I was dancing, and I was making people cards. And then at Mudd, I joined the computer music class, so I learned I could do things a little bit with the computer and the arts. And then I went to grad school, and after I got out of grad school, I started looking for jobs and decided that I should like network with people at hackathons. And I live outside of New York City, so one of the things I found was something called Monthly Music Hackathon. And at the Monthly Music Hackathon, I learned how to start to make my musical explorations really like modify them with code. And I did all sorts of fun things, and it led me to wanting to make generative music all the time, basically. And I ended up becoming a STEAM instructor. And so in that, I got to work with all sorts of little things. So this is like a set of musical robots that are communicating with each other. And this wasn't really, I don't think it was really what I would consider art, but it was creative coding. And it was instructing and it was fun. And I was like, I like instructing. I would prefer to also have the ability to teach college students. So I went to get another graduate degree, and that was an MFA program in Maine. And so now I'm a professional artist, and I get to teach workshops both to kids, but also to adults. And so what am I aiming for as an artist? So one of the things that I think is important, and I honestly feel something that I started to pick up a little bit at Mudd, but it's important when I'm trying to do art. So the idea of the medium is the message is like, what are you choosing? Like if you're making something, what medium are you using to convey your ideas with? Why are you choosing it? What's important? How are you going to implement it? Who's it affecting? So one of the things that is something that bothers me a lot is the feelings of loneliness and disconnection that I see so many people around me that they have. And so I'm trying to make art that emphasizes like the existing connections that are there and that help people understand that through their embodiment and their emotions, their agency, they're not as disconnected as they think they are. They do have some effect on their environments and on the people around them. And so I'm using different media to do this. So interactive installation is actually a really useful way to do this because you move and you feel what's happening around you. And just coding is a really useful tool to get this sort of thing done because there's so many ways you can use code. It makes it easy to use many different media to make things fast. So that, Jessica and I just talked a little bit about creative coding in general, but we're going to get into like what is creative coding now. So creative coding. It's basically using coding to create any creative output. So like some famous examples are like, there's a guy named Zach Lieberman who makes prints, and he also makes installations. And like Laura Lee McCarthy is doing a very interesting and intriguing and terrifying performance art piece where she's documenting her pregnancy, and she can do it through creative coding. And then there's a guy named Simon Penny who does all sorts of cool things with musical interactive robots that'll interact with you. But that's also creative coding. Like there's a lot of stuff out there that's creating creative coding. And so some of it's going to be compiled. So the code's going to be run and executed before you run it. And then some of it's going to be run and executed live, like in live coding. Some of it's going to be displayed on a computer on a digital display. It can be projected. So this is a computer display in the top left. The bottom right, the projection. This is at the bottom left is an example of some of Jessica's pen plotting. So that's a physical example of like creative code. And then basically the code just kind of, it looks like code. So there's some examples of code there. And we are talking about generative art, live coding, and interactive art mainly because that's what we focus on. There are many other ways that you can break creative coding down. I guess if you're looking for art world applications, if you look for new media art, that's where you can find a lot of the cool creative coding examples. For practical purposes, it's used to create and modify images. It can be used to make graphics, animation, games. So many of the games that you, if you like games, like most of the people who are making the visuals and whatever is going into it, they have the same skills that people who consider themselves creative coders have. They've got a lot of the same skills. Can be used for music, experiences. So it doesn't need to be output in the art world to be creative coding, but that is what I'm currently living in. So next, we're going to talk about generative art.
Yeah, cool. So generative art, it's like usually like definition, it's like at least partially generated algorithmically. So like in this example here, so I'm simulating when light comes into a cup, like the cup in the upper right corner, it reflects off of things and forms this like kind of heart-shaped thing. And so I simulated it as well over in the bottom one where like that's the lines coming in and coming out and kind of overlapping in that way. And then I kind of like made it more random as you go to the left, where I like introduce like roughness to the round part, so that way like the heart kind of disappears or reappears if you're reading left to right. But yeah, it usually follows a set predefined sets of rules. You write the code draws an image or does whatever is kind of needed to be done. And there's like it's been happening for like quite a long time. Like a couple of names like Vera Molnar worked on it. I want to say maybe Katarina knows if it's like the 50s or the 60s when she was making things.
But... The 60s.
Okay. Yeah, so it's been happening for a long time. And so actually like what's kind of fun is like the pen plotter that I use, there used to be pen plotters, like maybe folks in this call know about them or something, but like maybe not, but it's like when you needed to draw like a graph in back in the age of typewriters and stuff, they would have something that you could like put a pen in and it would like draw a bar chart or a pie chart or things like that. And artists used started to take that and start to modify it and make it draw like art as well. Yeah, so a lot of the computer art you see is a result of a generative process. And yeah, that's I think all I have to say. Katarina, I don't know if you saw, but I think like the audio might not be working. So I know we can test it in the next.
Well, I will find out if the audio is not working. They'll be very sad. Okay. So hopefully it is. I think hopefully the audio is just really low. Yeah, so interactive art. So I specifically, the reason it will be sad if the audio is not working is because I make interactive art that uses sound as a medium. So this will be a little less engaging if you don't hear the sound that they react to. So in general, when you're working with interactive art, you've got a pre-built experience set up. You've got pre-built code. You have to like set up. It can take hours. It can take days. You have to set up like a whole entire room area that people are moving around in most of the time. If you're making an interactive installation, if you're making a smaller thing, you still have to like build it. You have to make sure that it's something that works the same way that you want it to, or breaks down in the same way that you think it should be every single time people engage with it. Because the artist wants to pre-shape the experience so the user can experience how, like, what their actions do to change specific variables, so they can understand like how they're interacting with it, as opposed to if the user has too many variables they can change, then it's really hard to understand what how their actions are affecting the system. And so it helps someone like explore a concept real time. And so it's not just like adding buttons. The idea is the participant enters the system and they trigger the system. And the system then responds to the trigger in some way. And then because the system responded to the trigger, the participant who's in the system now is presented with the opportunity to respond. And if the work is built well enough, people are going to really want to respond. It's going to be much harder for them to respond. And respond doesn't necessarily mean they want to engage with the work, although that's very gratifying when it is. It could mean they want to leave the system completely, and they do. This is an example of people who engaged with the system, but some examples you might have seen of interactive art out there. So one that's not computer-based, but it's still considered interactive art, is actually Liz Phillips' Granite Ground. This was done a little while ago, and I think it was done in the 70s. But it's basically like you walk into a room and you touch different rocks. And because she wired the whole entire place, and I guess it was physical computing. She basically wired everything, and she used the rocks as, like, I think, conductors. I'm not the best at hardware things, but she made a really engaging interactive system that's basically working totally without computers, and just touch rocks, there's sound, walk through the space. As you move through the space, the sounds will change. Something that you might have seen if you look at interactive art from Japan is Team Lab. Team Lab's experiences, Jessica could talk about them if you guys have questions, maybe. Maybe not, I don't know. I didn't ask beforehand, but Team Lab's got really cool interactive work. And then I'm a big fan of Raphael Lozano-Hemmer's work, and Brian Knepp. Brian Knepp makes these cool, like, you walk through the space, and it's similar to what I was trying to do, but with visuals. You walk through space and there's a projection down on the floor, and like as you move through, visuals respond. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff out there, and I'm going to try to show you what interactive work looks like for me. The most recent installation I got to put up. So I'm going to scroll to where the most engaging section of this video is. Okay. Can you guys hear what's going on? Or
I don't think we can hear it now.
Oh, that's very sad. Okay, so what happened here was one of them was trying to trigger the video, the camera in the center, while another was the one who's standing here in the middle now was standing next to a speaker. The speaker responded as the other moved. The other was like, she's just kind of like, it's speaking to me, sort of. And then they're just kind of, the other one's like, wait, I'm going to trigger it by running. So it was really fun to watch these young ladies just interact with this, because they stayed up in the loft and just played with the system for like a whole entire like half an hour. And it was really fun because they were clearly enjoying themselves. Okay. So, oops. Next, Jessica gets to talk about live coding. So
I get to talk about live coding, but as you can see, we both, this is us both performing at a residency at Harvard Works on Governor's Island. And so Katarina is performing audio, and up on the right screen, that's actually Katarina's screen, and you can watch what she's doing live. And then behind us is my screen with the visuals, and again, the YAML file with the code that we're modifying and stuff. And so live coding, like when you first hear of it, I think you think people are going up there and they're opening up a blank like file and writing like import and like doing everything. And maybe like some people do that, but more often folks are using languages that are already kind of like made so that they like have DSLs and stuff like that make it easier to do what you're trying to do. So there's things like title cycles and SonicPy over in the audio space that provide a lot of like you open up a blank file, but you're able to like create beats right away, like without having to like import the audio thing and writing all the code like that. Yeah, so it's really cool to see how different people approach live coding, because it is like there are no strict rules there. Some people do node-based coding, like with Touch Designer, and that's awesome. Some people build amazing worlds in like Unreal Engine, like what people use for game development, but it's all like weird and wonky, and then they like control the characters that move around and modify parameters and like create this like visual experience as like that's reacting to audio and doing things like that. So people can really like reach for different tools and just kind of like use them in kind of a weird way, and then you're like good for joining a live code performance. Yeah, so like there are some like cool like common things that aren't always done but like are pretty common. So it's kind of like you're revealing what you're doing. You're not like keeping it completely secret. So you're like showing something. You're showing a little bit about like, here's what I'm changing to actually cause this to happen. You can see in the video right now, Katarina's modifying a chunk of code or executing it or something like that. And so it's fun to like attend these too, because you can kind of like watch what other people are doing and kind of like learn, or you just like, it's like additional experience to kind of see behind the scenes of what is going into it. Yeah, and I think like if you like heard of like demo scene by chance, like I think this like roughly approximately grew out of that. But with demo scene, it's a little bit more about like my understanding, I've never done it, but there's more strict rules about like writing, how you write the code and stuff. And with this, it's a little bit more about the performance and the experience of being there. Yeah. I think that's all I want to say for the live coding part. And now we're going to kind of shift from, so those were the things, areas of creative coding we wanted to give you a little background about. And now we're going to kind of say more general things about creating art in this way. So at least one thing is experimentation. So something that both Katarina and I do is like try to learn what our materials are good at, understand our tools and such. And so we like create a lot of things to test different, like I created a bunch of prints with different pens to just kind of see like how it looked. And the one in the top became really glitchy. The top right was a very glitchy, my pen was like messed up in some way. So it's like, there's a lot of exploration in this way. And then another aspect of this, which turns out to be huge too, is like documentation. So having like good cameras to take photos of your interactive installation is like really important to communicate it to folks who aren't necessarily present, who might want to like maybe show your work or attend an event that you're doing or something, and you need like some documentation to show what it is. There's also like documentation of the process. A lot of times people are interested in like, how did you create this thing? And that kind of contributes to the art that you're creating. there's a bit about self-promotion. Like, people should know about the shows that you're putting on. So you should like use social media and like post flyers and stuff like that. And then there's also like a portfolio display and maintenance and stuff. So like when like you are kind of like summarizing the work that you've done so far, it's like kind of like your resume, but like in like with a lot of things that you've created and such.
Yeah, that's something that I spend a lot of time on, for sure. And so that plays into getting funding. So especially if there are two different ways artists can have historically, I guess, funded themselves, or I guess three different ways. So one is you go out and get grants. So I'm living in this world right now where I spend a lot of time trying to get grants, and you try to get it for like space to experiment. So the bottom right corner is an example of getting space to experiment. You get it so that you can get gear. You can do it for all other sorts of things. You can also self-fund yourself. And so there are different ways you can fund yourself. One of them is like through ticket sales, event sales. So the live coding group that Jessica and I both participate in, a lot of our performances happen at venues that let us sell tickets. And that just lets us afford to be able to rent the space so that we can hold the show for the most part. Yeah. And then there's the idea of other jobs. So this is one of the reasons why it's actually really, really cool that Jessica's doing this and also has a full-time job, because I've got a part-time job. And so other jobs like help you buy things. Like I bought this little gadget here. It lets me do 8-channel sound installations theoretically. But I bought that using my money, and I have a part-time job, so that's always very expensive. But Jessica can buy little doohickeys because they have a full-time job, makes it a little easier. And that's something that historically, like if you guys have heard of Marcel Duchamp, and he's the guy who like put the toilet somewhere in like the sculpture park or sculpture show, and like he's important because he started the whole entire thing for multiples. He started the movement to make multiples, and that kicked off the Fluxus group, which is what I'm particularly trained in. But that I think he was an architect. He might have been he had a full-time job, and a lot of people who got to make innovations had full-time jobs because they weren't necessarily running over after like grants. They weren't trying to find sponsors. Sponsors are basically the next slide. But they were like, they had a secure space. So they were like, I can just experiment with things. I can do things without necessarily figuring out how I'm going to fund it, right? I guess there's one other way. Sometimes people are independently wealthy. So that's another thing. So what is a sponsor or a backer, right? It can be many things. So we've been fortunate enough to work with HarvestWorks quite often. They're a not-for-profit in the city, New York City. And they basically like let us as artists use their space, put on events. And then, for example, I'm a part-time mathematics engineer, and like I mention this because my employer knows I'm an artist and knows that Mathematica could potentially be used to make cool art. So I have been given license to just do whatever I want with Mathematica on my own time. So I've been experimenting a little bit. Hopefully more to come about that some other time. And then the last idea is backers who are also creators. So I have a friend who's a font designer, and he's basically told me, use my font, please, test it, see what happens. I'm still in the testing phase. This is just testing, sort of like Jessica's testing of the pen. But the idea is that's another sort of backing to just exchange. And so to get funding, you send out applications. So a lot of my time, more time than I like, sometimes I spent like on applications. And you can do cool things once you have applications. There's different sorts. So like there's sorts for residencies, there's sorts to give workshops, there's sorts to get fellowships. So the middle picture is like a collaboration where I went on a residency and there were other artists there. So these two in the picture were our models. They were dancers. Someone else is a costume designer. She made the costumes. Another person's a projection artist, so he projected little figures, the live pictures of them dancing, doing things live on this little ostrich egg. Another person carved the ostrich egg. I just took pictures and like made them interesting looking with my generative art, but that's what I did. So it was a big collaborative process. It was really fun. We've got applications for open calls. Jessica and I do those a lot. I got to do a workshop through the open call. This was a picture of Jessica performing with someone, presumably through an open call, because that's how the LiveCode group honestly does things. You just apply to perform, and if you get chosen, you get to perform. So like we said, you want opportunities, you look for those. Sometimes you can get them in galleries, you apply to gallery open calls too, but because you want to perform, you want to show your work, you want to do everything, you have to look for opportunities outside of the gallery. So like, for example, my friends and I in Maine, when I was in Maine, we just kind of asked the bar owner, one of my friends worked there, and if we could just like have an art show night at the bar, and he's like, so long as you're not stopping my business, go ahead. So we did. There's so you can find spaces by talking to people, asking someone, can I use your space? I have a friend who hosts shows in her apartment in New York City because she's got enough space to do that. You can host them in your house. You can go to public spaces, say there's a bridge in New York City where the LiveCode group has done a pop-up performance or two. So like, there are just different ways you can do this. You can display your work digitally. You can distribute your work. Say Jessica did something cool with postcards, and that, I don't know if Jessica thought of it this way, but that's actually distributing your work, because not only is the person who receives the postcard seeing it, but the post people are going to see the work too. Some people have jobs that'll let them display work. You can rent out a space if you can afford it, if you can figure out how to finance it. And students and professors can use schools. So lastly, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica for networking.
Yeah, finishing up, yes. Yeah, so another aspect that's really like useful, and then also is like motivating as well, is networking. So finding other people making weird things, or making not necessarily weird, but making art in certain ways. And it's also like really fun because like kind of like Katarina's example of like the residency where people all had different skills. That's like kind of similar in this space too, because like kind of like no two people have exactly the same expertise and stuff, and you can always kind of use that to like collaborate or learn from each other and things like that. So how do you meet those people? We're both lucky to be in and around New York City, and there's a lot going on in New York City. Like the LiveCode group we keep mentioning, there's meetups, monthly music hackathon. There's these group shows like LiveCode shows. So not only do you go there and perform, but you talk to other people who are watching this interesting form of art, and you meet people through that. You can attend other artists' events. So like as you meet people, then you're like, they have like an opening at a gallery, so you stop by and check it out, and you can continue to kind of meet people in that way. There's residencies like Katarina was talking about. And then there's also kind of like the online side of things too. So this image is from the month of January is January. So every day for the month of January, there's different prompts for generative artists, and just like a bunch of people online will post this every day. And it's like, I've done it the last 2 years, and it's been fun to like meet people through that, because you'll post it and you'll like, other people are like slogging through it as well. And it's cool to have that like online community. There was a pen plotter postcard exchange. So like you plot postcards and then like mail them to each other too. So I got a vast collection of other people's pen plotter postcards. Yeah, so networking is a great, like, that was a surprisingly like useful way to network, is just participating in these online daily activities. Yeah, and then wrapping up is further opportunities to learn. Like, how do you like figure this stuff out? There's lots of great online tutorials. You can find meetups and community groups like I was talking about. You can find workshops and formal courses and go to grad school. Yeah, I think like we can probably share a couple of like specifics too if you're in like New York City, for example. There's a lot of stuff on Discord right now, like a lot of communities working on things on Discord. Mastodon has a lot of like pen plotters and generative artists, surprisingly too, maybe unsurprisingly. But yeah, I think that's all. Thank you so much. We're still Jessica and Katarina. We have a little bit of time for questions, I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being our speaker tonight. We do have quite a few questions for you. So coding live in front of an audience seems really stressful. How do you stay calm?
I would like to go first. I'll let Jessica go next. So I personally stay calm two ways. One, I practice a whole bunch beforehand. That's part of it. I just like make sure I know what I can do. The second thing is I actually have done a lot of teaching workshops and teaching, like I did a lot of TA, like teaching in front of a lab for TA. And so because I was used to like typing and trying to answer questions at the same time, it's less stressful, but it's still stressful because yeah, it's a different sort of stress, but it kind of helped me a bit. Yeah. And then also I sort of sometimes block out everybody else other than my coding partner, which isn't necessarily good. Jessica might have more.
Yeah, I think I have something kind of similar. Like, or like I hadn't done performances before. Like I don't play any musical instruments. So it was also kind of a new world of actually like standing up in front of people. And instead of giving like a tech talk, it was like, here, look at my art. You're going to have to look at my art for a while now. But like I do it like it's like for the most part for me, like it's not as stressful as you would think it would be. What I do notice is when I start to mess up, then it's like, oh no, then I realize like I'm in a room and I'm like, oh, they're all gonna see this. But like every time I've messed up and I've asked afterwards, people are like, I couldn't tell like that, like no one really knows what you're trying to perform. And so if you kind of like the screen goes black, people are like, oh wow, maybe that was a interesting artistic choice and stuff. So that's worked out really well. Also, our communities are really friendly here too. Like when everything breaks, people start to cheer. So like finding supportive communities like that has also been really nice for that. And I think that's pretty general for a lot of live code folks. Like no one's really like, it's such like a weird like art form that people aren't like, oh no, you didn't do it perfectly. Like people are kind of there for the whole thing.
Great to hear. So a question to the both of you, are your performances improvisational, scripted, combination of the two, or something else?
I tend to go for kind of scripted. Mainly like it's always improvisational, but it's because I don't live code often enough to like always feel like it's safe to just go and like start with no plan whatsoever and just kind of like see what happens. Like I don't remember the names of the functions. I don't remember anything. And so when I'm coding, I'm like, oh, this sounds like a good progression. I've got 30 minutes to fill. I think I can do that for this 30 minutes. And I just practice like the different ways I can do that. And then things go wrong. So it ends up being improvisational, but there was a plan.
Yeah, I kind of do the same route where it's like I usually I like prepare some material ahead of time. So I'll like know who I'm going to perform with and like listen to a little bit of their music. And if it's like kind of a dark techno, then I might go with something different. Like I'll set things up ahead of time. And then but usually I run out of material so fast that I have to improvise and stuff. So and I've created some like cool things like where I'm just like, what if I change this variable? And it becomes neat up there. And it's also like a cool, like, because there's a little bit of practice every time I create like a new system, like I'm kind of like learning a brand new instrument and I get a feel for like, oh, if I twist this knob, then like this thing will happen and stuff. And so then it's like kind of cool to like go up and then just be like, okay, I'm going to twist this knob and I kind of know like how to like move it if the music gets darker or something, like how do I like move the visuals to do something similar. But it's a lot of improv.
Great, thank you for sharing. So how do you all find inspiration and push past the analysis paralysis to actually start coding something?
Okay, so so one of the things that's useful for this, there are two things that are useful. One of them is actually, I'm not necessarily as good at finishing them as Jessica is. Jessica's really good at finishing those like group group events. I have started some and they're really challenging for me because I'm always like choosing different media and choosing different platforms, and that's not always smart. But it's good for like getting things out there and just iterating ideas. And so like if you have a daily thing and you're like, well, I have to get it done, like you're like, okay, can't be perfect, needs to have something has to happen, whatever. And the other thing that's useful for me is especially when I'm working on longer term projects, like I block out a lot of like, these are the things I kind of want to happen. They don't necessarily all have to happen, but I'm going to spend an hour this day, an hour that day, an hour this day, and just make sure I actually spend the time working on it. And sometimes things happen, sometimes they don't, but it gets rid of my paralysis because like I put aside the time and I was doing it.
Yeah, I think that like sitting down at a coffee shop and being like, okay, for the next hour, I'm going to work on like this part of the code or something has been like a way to get code produced and stuff. I think like I have like a pile of ideas that I like want to work on, and then I'll just kind of like iterate between them. And then like having due dates is really nice, where like the prompts or something, it's like that kind of fits me into like, okay, create something for this today. Or I'm like creating album art for people. So then it's like, okay, I'm going to create something for that right now and stuff. Yeah.
Hey, thank you. So what are like first steps to get started coding creativity? And also like, what can this person, without a lot of experience coding do?
I would like to share my screen again because we prepared a few extra slides just in case that would happen. So when you're trying to learn, here are some common creative coding platforms. So like the processing language is used by a lot of people. And the coding train, I said the language, it's a sketchbook. The coding train is like a learning platform for that. There's all sorts of different versions of processing. The coding train has tutorials from an NYU professor on all of them, and they're really great and easy to follow. Shaders, Jessica uses shaders a lot sometimes, or at least used to use shaders a lot. I'm not totally sure if they're still using shaders, but Book of Shaders is a great way to use shaders. For live coding, these are some simple ways for live coded visuals. People like to use Hydra, Sonic Pi for sound, and then the group that you can learn more about live coding in general, you can learn about them from TopLab. And so for interactive installations, I don't use Arduino too often, but you can learn about Arduino at arduino.cc. In general, Max and Touch Designer, these are all paid things like Arduino, Max, and Touch Designer. The others are free, the stuff at the top. But anyway, that's one thing. And then you can find, like, of course, there's all sorts of tutorials on YouTube. Discord, so I like Bird's Nest. The guy who runs it, Raphael, is great. He's really interactive. If you go and you do this, you can do he'll give a prompt a week, and if you submit something to his challenge, he'll give you feedback on your code and like on the art and like everything. And it's a great system. TopLab Live Coding Discord, you can learn about TopLab and participate in live coding in general there. You can also join the New York Live Code New York Discord, but that's more useful if you live in New York, right? So then Coding Train is friendly for creative coding for kids. And then the Hack Club is also useful potentially for kids. Or at least I've heard about this one. I haven't taught kids recently, so I haven't had this tested. Yeah. I looked those up and asked some friends.
Wonderful, thank you. So we will send out these resources to everyone. So you will have this in the follow-up email, and then also one of our participants mentioned about a Seattle creative coding Discord group. So I will also include that in the email so everyone has that as well. I do have another question for you before we wrap up. Do you use generative AI? And if so, what are your favorite engines?
I have
Yeah,
not really. I will let Jessica take this. I have not really.
no, I think my answer is going to be kind of similar, where like I'm a machine learning engineer, and then like all of this AI art like things started where it was like actually producing things that looked interesting. And then but I have not touched it super much. Like I know like I've had friends, what they do is like they use it to generate assets that they then use to kind of like crunch and create something else and stuff. I know like it's integrated in Touch Designer now, so people are doing interesting things where like you can like make arm movements and it'll like draw an image based off of that. So it is like kind of like there's some interesting like you would think like blends of tech and art, like there'd be a lot of things, and I think they are kind of starting to appear once in a while.
Great. Jessica, I know we have someone who's interested in ITP camp, and I know you were starting to type. If you wanted to just talk about it.
Yeah, I'll look into whether like I haven't heard of it not happening. Like all my friends who like go every year are like, oh yeah, are you doing ITP camp? But yeah, you're right. Like there's also like an early bird situation. So like if I can't find the link, I don't see it right now. But if once it goes up, you should sign up, because then you save a lot of money on it if you're interested in it. There's also things like the Recurse Center, which is free, and that's like a coding, like a place you can go to code a bunch. And then it's cool for Poetic Computation has really interesting things. We'll send out the list.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I want to thank both Katarina and Jessica for joining us today and for sharing your knowledge and insights with us. Thank you to our audience for your questions and for attending this event. I hope you enjoyed it. We will follow up within the next week with the recorded video and any presentation material and resources. Up next, we do have LGBTQ plus technology, a civil rights journey from the Mud Joker with Jeff Hong, class of 87, on Tuesday, March 19 at 5 p.m. Pacific time. If you are interested in being a Mud Talk speaker, please contact us at alumni@hmc.edu. All future events can be found on our website at alumni.hmc.edu. Have a great night and see you next time.